"29 minutes before the top of the hour. The good, the bad, and the ugly in roughly 20 minutes here on Miller and Moulton, Southwest Florida's Fox Sports Radio. He works for the Four Letter Network in Tallahassee. He is Jeff Cameron, host of, appropriately enough, The Jeff Cameron Show. And you can follow him on Twitter at the letter J Cameron Show. Jeff, top of the morning to you. How are you?
I'm great, guys. Top of the morning to you, too.
Okay. When the head coach having COVID is not the worst thing associated with the program, things are not going well, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a long year for Florida State fans. I think if they had any doubt, that realization was made crystal clear with the result of the Georgia Tech game. And I think less than the result, or maybe more than the result, excuse me, it was this striking realization that the overhaul is going to take some time because there's just not enough explosiveness out there. Depth of talent's not there. And I think in addition to that, obviously you don't have a starting quarterback, not one that you trust. And anybody that you would turn to is going to be making their first ever appearance in a college football game if it's not Jordan Travis. So you don't have a lot of experience there. I think it's a long road to hoe. In many ways, if you're a Florida State fan, I think you got to look at this year as year zero, sort of a cataclysmic confluence of events where you make a change, which is always difficult because you're going to have to install a new offense and a new defense, and you got a new staff who's got to relate to the kids and tell a message, and you got to get people to buy in, and inevitably there's going to be attrition. People are going to say yay or nay to that pitch. And that's what's happened to Florida State. But in addition, then of course you have COVID strike, and while every school had to deal with that, I think the ones that had new coaching staffs that didn't get spring practice in were really dealt a devastating blow. And I think that is abundantly clear. I mean, having 3 practices and no scrimmages in the spring whatsoever set them back big time in terms of discovering who could play and who couldn't when the lights came on. And I think you saw a lot of guys in that first game revert back to sort of a losing mentality, this here we go again, that Florida State's experienced for really the last 3 years. And I don't feel bad for the kids. They've been beat up a little bit. But I think if you're the staff, you've got to find a way to identify the kids that are going to be there with you when you do start to win games again, as you move forward here, the next season and the year after, when things return somewhat, we hope, to normal. You got to find the guys that aren't infected right now with this here we go again mentality. So it's going to be a tough season. I don't see any way that Florida State finishes this year with a winning record. But I do think if you wipe the slate clean and decide what I'm looking for here is incremental improvement week to week and buy-in, well, then there's a reason to invest. I mean, that's what teams do when you watch transition. So hopefully, that's the mentality. If not, if people are still holding on to this delusion that Florida State's going to win 8-9 games, it's going to be brutal to watch.
Jeff, just how difficult is it for the Florida State fan? And I'm guessing you'll hear it this afternoon when UCF, I think, just scored again on Georgia Tech. But when when the number 4 team supposedly in the state, and they're not right now, we all know that. But when UCF goes up and goat rodeos Tech, and Florida State, even the 2 block kicks and all the things they had going their way, couldn't muster up much of an offense. I mean, it doesn't just show that you're down. It kind of looks like you're way down, Jeff.
Oh, yeah. No, they've been way down. I think maybe it's just this profound realization when you see that. Now, again, I will say, I do believe that Florida State will play better. I don't know how good they'll be. Those are 2 different things. But they'll play better, I do believe, as the season goes along, because these are the weeks of practices that they didn't get. So I think you'll start to see now a team start to marginally improve each week. Now, there are certain personnel groupings that they just can't fix overnight. You got to raise the floor through recruiting, and they're also being hurt by all of this with the inability to have kids come on campus and to make visits. So it really couldn't have come at a worse time. Not that any time is a good time for a global pandemic, but I think when you're, ushering in a new regime, it's a particularly devastating time to have that hit. It does look that way. Now, I think if you're a Florida State fan, you watch that game, you said, all right, it's a 7-point game in the fourth quarter. Georgia Tech's hanging in there. But at the end of the day, you're not wrong. UCF had over 600 yards of offense and 49 points. But they run a system in which their quarterback is confident. They expect to score. They're used to humming up and down the field. Florida State has no confidence in that regard right now. I think that things start to go wrong. Everybody kind of looks around like, are we doing this again? And so, again, a lot of it is personnel, especially at quarterback. But I also think some of it is, without question, the mentality that these guys don't expect. UCF expected to go in there and score those kinds of points. They expect it every week. They probably believe they're going to do that if they face LSU, Georgia, or anybody else.
Absolutely.
I don't think goes into games now expecting to do that.
I mean, we mentioned the stat on Friday. It's now 3+ years where UCF has scored 30 or more points in every game but one, beginning with the season opener in 2017. And you're right. But Jeff, look at Miami, which, let's face it, has been a grease fire off and on for the last dozen years themselves. And last year, goodness knows, was a grease fire. Yet they find a quarterback. They get on the transfer market, they get a couple of D linemen and a kicker to fill in some holes. And voila, okay, now Miami looks like a legitimate top 15, 20 team in the country. I mean, if you're Florida State, can you see where if they can have a quarterback, Jeff, they have not had one since 2014. If they can find a quarterback and a couple of key guys, are they one good offseason away from all of a sudden looking like a representative program?
Yeah, I think they are. Actually, it's interesting. I'm not sure if James Blackman, the starting quarterback, and again, I always like to put this out there. It's a caveat, but I think people should know that James Blackman has been beset by a terrible set of circumstances. He's on his 4th OC and his 3rd head coach. He's not real good, but he's also had a tough set of circumstances, and he's a good kid. So I say all that to say this. He can't start for Florida State much longer. They cannot continue to roll him out there. It's not going to work. Whatever good was in him as a player was broken a long time ago, and you'd be better off building for your future. I say I'm not sure James Blackman was going to start. Let me circle back. Chubba Purdy came in as the top football player in the state of Arizona. His brother plays at Iowa State. He's an athletic kid. He's densely built for a freshman. He's over 200 pounds, runs a 4.4, 4.5 40. I think they're going to utilize him to really kind of bridge the gap there with what they don't have on the offensive line, which is to say move the pocket, et cetera. And then he broke his collarbone in their very first scrimmage, right, of the fall. So who knows? They may have been angling to go with a different quarterback and one that might very well be able to play before that happened. I can't know that for sure because COVID didn't allow us to go out to practice. But I will tell you, that is true. When you have just a mere competence at quarterback and a belief amongst those playing with and around him, you can see an elevation of a team. Derek King's doing exactly that for Miami. They were awful last year. And his athleticism and ability has certainly escalated what their capabilities are. So I think that's true. I do think Florida State is a ways off on that offensive line, though. And I don't want to say that I think getting a quarterback, whether it's in a transfer portal or if, in fact, it's one that's already on the roster that hasn't started, is going to be the salve that heals all. Because that group up front isn't good. And they haven't been good for some time. Now, they saw some signs from some of the younger players that they started that I think they can build around. You have a couple of redshirt freshmen that they rolled out there who played better than any of the experienced offensive linemen they've been putting out there. So we know offensive line transformations don't happen overnight, but you better have some pieces that you can build around. I think they did find that in pass pro in the Georgia Tech game. So we'll see. I mean, they got a ways to go. One of those transfers that you're talking about would have to be, I think, a big-time offensive lineman. You need to get somebody who's, I don't know, disenfranchised with an SEC program and decides to roll on in to Florida State where you could pencil him in and suddenly you'd have a frontline guy that could really play. They're ways off there, but I do think, having a good quarterback changes the dynamic quite a bit.
How in the hell are Florida State only a 9.5-point underdog in this game? I mean, we pay attention to these line things. Is there something about this did that jump out at you, Jeff? Because it certainly did to us.
Yeah, it's the first thing I looked at this morning. I too like jump on the lines pretty early as a sporting guy. And I'll tell you, there's only two ways that I can look at this. It's two things that I can point to. First of all, they'll note it's a rivalry game and players will play over their head. B, Miami's defense looks terrible. And I do think that was a worry going into the season. I get it. There's some dynamic athletes on that Louisville team, and that's going to be a good offense. But there were some really alarming areas of concern for Miami, in particular, I think, in that secondary. I don't know that Florida State can exploit it. I do know that having the bye week in between that Georgia Tech game and this game, I think we'll see them put together a game plan that gives them a fighting chance. I think Florida State, the one thing I will say, they're not going to win this game, but I will say defensively, I think they have a chance to be pretty darn good. I know that you would look at the Georgia Tech game and you'd see 5.8 yards per play and you'd say otherwise. That's fair, but they didn't play fast. They played like they were thinking. And if you look at the personnel isn't terrible. They don't have an elite rush in. They're average at linebacker. They're deep in the secondary. They're really good in the interior of the defensive line. If they can force Miami to have to drive the football 10, 12, 14-play drives, they got a chance to shorten the game and make it reasonably interesting. Maybe Vegas is looking at that.
And historically, there have been some bad Miami teams that have played some good Florida State teams really tough and vice versa. So I think the line is what it is because Vegas is looking at the history, not because they're looking at tape from the early part of the season. Jeff, stay safe. Be well.
You do the same. It's always a pleasure. Be well.
Jeff, thank you very much. All the best to Jeff Cameron. Afternoons, 97.9 ESPN in Tallahassee. Follow him on Twitter, the letter J Cameron Show, the letter J Cameron Show. Jeff Cameron joining us here on Miller and